All right, we are going to study the respiratory system or respiratory system, if you pronounce it correctly. And we're actually going to start over on this side. We're only going to point out a few things in the septal area, and then we'll head over to this side and go through more of the details. So over here in the septal area, when you see the blue color, that indicates cartilage, and then of course the white or tan color indicates bone. So there's quite a bit of bone in the nasal septum that divides the left and right nostrils. The superior portion of the bone is the perpendicular plate of the ethmoid bone, and the inferior portion of the nasal septum that's made of bone is made up of vomer bone. And then you have nasal cartilage. So note once again the blue color. Let's come over here. And over here on this sagittal section, they've removed the nasal septum area, but you can still see the blue coloration for the cartilage. If we start to move inside of the nasal cavity, the opening or the nostril is called the external nares area, or external nares because we have both right and left. And then you're into the nasal cavity. You have three bony prominences. The top one here is the superior nasal concha. This one is the middle nasal concha. And down here we have the inferior nasal concha. Then as air moves in, you have this opening behind the conchae, and this is the internal nares area. Note that there's an indentation. This goes toward the middle ear. This is called the auditory tube. Back here we have a tonsil. Our first tonsil, this is called the pharyngeal tonsil, or you can call it the adenoids. And then what we're going to do is we're going to follow down this air passageway. This is called the pharynx, which is the throat area, and it has three different regions. If you're up in the back of the nasal cavity, this is called the nasopharynx. If you're behind the tongue, behind the oral area, this is called the oropharynx. And if you're behind the cartilage of the larynx, this is your voice box area, that portion of the throat is called the laryngopharynx. As soon as this open passageway goes behind the breathing tube or the trachea, that is called the esophagus, which is part of the digestive system. Let's go into the area where we have the mouth. This potential space is called the oral cavity. And just above it, to separate it from the nasal cavity, is the palate. Notice we have the bony palate, so we have maxilla and palatine bones here. And we also have a soft area without any bone called the soft palate. So the bony palate extends far back, and then the soft palate continues, and as it hangs down, that area is called the uvula. Just inferior to the uvula, you have another tonsil. It looks sort of oval shaped. That is called the palatine tonsil. Over here we have the tongue, very muscular, and on the posterior side of the tongue you have the lingual tonsil. If we move inferior to that, we're almost done. We are in the voice box area, once again called the larynx, and there's a cartilage flap here that helps to close up the air passageway when we swallow. This is called the epiglottis. Inside of the larynx or voice box area, we have vocal folds, which we often call vocal cords, vocal folds. And then just note as you move down the air passageway or the trachea that there's a lot of cartilage here, once again indicated in blue because we need to keep the air passageway propped open with that cartilage. And once again, when you go posterior to that, you have the feeding tube, the food and drink tube called the esophagus. That one is always collapsed unless you actually have food or drink in it. And that's it for this model.